Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of the Digital Product Creative Challenge. With me, I'm Liv, and I'll be taking you through a couple of things in XD today. If you missed last week, that's where we started this off. Generally speaking, what we're looking at over the course of the next 4 weeks is how to sort of look at building a feature within an existing app. So going through a couple of processes and techniques that you would typically use within a product team and using XD to execute on those things. So last week, we looked at a couple of different things which I'll take you through and just recap. But essentially, what I've got here just to start is a couple of just overview slides. So as I kind of mentioned, what we're looking in this creative challenge to do is to sketch, test and design a new feature within an existing app. So that app, if you missed last week, is called Wildcard. You can actually go and download it. It's available for people in Australia. So if it's a sort of banking app. So if you want to, that's I think wildcard.money. You can sign up, you can get into it, you can play around and see sort of a bit of a frame for what we're looking at the moment. If not, I think I mentioned this last week, you can also use more apps that you're familiar with. So if you're in a different country and you want to use a banking app that you have and that you're more familiar with, go ahead and do that because that's kind of what we'll be looking at for this feature. All right, so just to give you a bit of an overview, I'll try and zoom in on a couple of these things. So week 1, we really focused on ideation and sketches. So that was looking about, I guess, getting some ideas out onto the table and figuring out what we want to test with people and using some techniques like crazy eights and concept cards. Week 2, so this week, what we're looking at is wireframes and prototypes. So we've gone away, we've tested a few of our ideas. Now we're thinking, we're ready, we're confident that this is potentially like a way to move forward and we think this is the right idea to take forward for this feature. So we're going to start to build things up. And I guess a word that I'll probably start using a lot is fidelity for these sorts of things. So really what we're looking at we're going from low fidelity to high fidelity. So we're going from really kind of lo-fi things like sketches, things that are really easy and building up as we go so that by the end of the 4 weeks or the 3 weeks, what we'll have is a really polished kind of feature that we can then hand over and talk about in week 3, which is around production and polish. So just to really quickly recap on last week in case you missed it, you can watch it, should still be up on YouTube. But essentially we looked at framing, so using a how might we question to frame the problem. We looked at ideation, so using crazy eights as a technique to get ideas out and think about rapidly ideating. And then we looked at making those ideas into concept cards, which is essentially things that we can go out into the wild and test. So the problem we had and the problem we're trying to look at throughout this entire creative challenge is how do we let people easily split bills? So it's pretty universal. Everyone generally goes out and has a dinner with a friend and you kind of end up paying for it yourself or they do and you have to go through that whole rigmarole of who paid for what and how much am I paying you. So this is looking about, I guess, incorporating that kind of very familiar behaviour into an app, which funnily enough, I don't know about other countries, but here in Australia at least, we don't have many apps, in fact banking apps that can do that. So this is a really cool feature that would actually be really useful, I think. All right, so as I mentioned, that's our problem. How might we easily allow users to split bills with friends? So that was our how might we statement from last week. So what do we learn? So I took this out to some friends. Now these are like really top level some ideas that came out from that. I'd be super curious if you guys took this out and tested with your friends and saw what they said, because this would be really good to sort of amalgamate them. But what I did was I took our concept cards and I put them in front of people and I sort of said, what do you prefer? What do you like? Why? Really digging into what they're sort of reading into these ideas. And so the couple of things that came out of this for me that I thought were useful to take ahead into the next round. Now, this is pretty basic and pretty like high level. You might typically have like a lot more answers. You might have some quotes from people and those are all really, really valuable resources to have when you've done testing. So what came out for me when I spoke to people about this was people really love notifications as a way to remind them to split bills because often they'll kind of forget I guess they'll go home, they'll go to bed, they'll forget that they pay for that stuff, and then it sort of comes down to like, oh, I need to dig into, looking how much it was, who had what, did I save a receipt, all that sort of stuff. So notifications were really good so that at the time they made a transaction, they'd be reminded or prompted to split the bill. People liked the idea of that bot, which was really funny, but also they said that they didn't really see themselves using that. So that kind of rules out the bot for now. People felt that tapping on a transaction was probably the simplest interaction. So that was like one of the ideas that we had, which was just really just going into your transaction list, tapping on the latest one, and then being able to split it from there. And I thought this was interesting. Most people said it reminded them of sharing a ride on Uber, and they liked that comparison. And I think that's interesting, and the reason I wanted to highlight that was because when we go into the next phase of developing this idea, we probably will start to draw on a few behaviours and patterns that are really familiar to us in other apps. Because I think with product design, unless you're introducing a really, really new behaviour, you really want to leverage patterns that exist already, because you don't want to really throw people into the deep end and make them feel like they just have no idea what to press. A really good feature will kind of take on some patterns people are familiar with, but not overwhelm them with something completely new and different. And I think that's a really good, interesting comparison that someone's made there. So we can kind of use something like that to inform how we then take this next part forward and start to design. So what we're going to look at today are 3 different things. And I'm going to touch on sort of all of these in a pretty high-level way. I think this generally applies to this whole Creative Challenge series, as I'm trying to make it really simple and easy for you to follow a really basic framework for incorporating a new feature into a product. If you're working in a product team, you'll probably know that there's 1,000 different ways to break it down and do these sorts of things. If you're not, I think this is a really good intro into just the top-level ideas of techniques, tips, tricks, things that you can do in the process around doing something like this. So the first one we're going to look at is quickly looking at a bit of a user flow. So that's sort of mapping out what, I guess, a prototype might look like, or what the journey that someone is taking as they're trying to complete the goal, which is to split the bill. Then we're going to look at quickly wireframing in XD. And so that's creating that low fidelity mock-up of the key screens that we want to look at. And then lastly, we're just going to quickly link it up with prototyping in XD. So again, all of this is really going through that same cycle of building up something to then have an item at the end to test with, which again, I would go out and I'd test and I'd keep testing until you really have no time left to test, because the more information we're getting back from users, the better, the more confident we'll feel taking this into production and getting it out there. All right, so the first thing I've done as part of this process is I've actually just changed our how might we statement into a goal or a user story. And the reason I've done that is just to make it really easy for me to understand what is the journey someone's going on to complete the goal that they've set out to complete. So the goal in this case is, as a wildcard user, I want to easily split a bill I've just paid for with friends so I'm not out of pocket. That's a typical structure for a user story. So as a user, I want to do X so that I can do Y or whatever that is. So again, you might go through a few different iterations of these in a similar way to a how might we. There isn't the perfect user story, so you might actually have to refine this a bit more. But that's kind of your basic structure. All right, so I'm going to open up a separate file that I've got here. I didn't mention, but there are assets which you can download. They should be at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending if you're on YouTube or the live chat. Can't quite remember. But I have prepared most of the wireframes sort of in advance, but I'm going to walk through how to create these anyway. But you should be able to have those and then play with them and adapt them however you like. Something I'll just flag and I'll mention is that I am using a font called GT Walsham, which is the brand font for Wildcard. Now, you probably won't have it, or if you do, that's great, but if you don't worry about it. There's a lot of similar ones on Google Fonts which are free to download. So I think maybe like Montserrat, I think there's one called Poppins, which are really close to something like this. So feel free to grab those and just replace the fonts with it. So I just anticipated maybe getting that question at some point. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start building this flow. Now I'm just going to drop this down to a smaller thing. So what I want to do is essentially map out each of the steps that someone's going to take while they are completing, I guess, the different actions to get to the goal of splitting a bill. So the way I'm going to do this is super lo-fi. Again, like I'm trying to be as quick as possible because really essentially at this point, I want to quickly work to get something in front of people and get them to test it. And this is really for my reference and the team's reference, so we kind of are all on the same page as to what we're designing. So the first thing I want to say is what's the first action that someone's going to take? Well, they're going to pay for the item that they're paying for, so the bill essentially. So I'm going to put this user's card to pay for, say it's lunch at a cafe. I'm just going to do this. So that's my first kind of step. That's the first action someone's going to take on this journey. That's the kind of trigger point. All right, so I've got this here. I'm going to just drop in this arrow, which I've already put in here, just so that I know that's kind of leading on to the next step. I might just reduce this size a bit. Just bring it here. Now, I'm essentially creating these sort of cards to form the different steps and linking them with arrows. And that's kind of helpful in that, like, if I have a separate journey or if this kind of goes off into a different path, it's quite easy just to show that it might diverge at some point. So you might have different options as you go. And this is going to be quite a, I guess, simple journey. What you might find is that things get more complicated and there's a lot to it, but I'm just trying to keep it quite high level for this one. All right, so my next step is user gets notification. They've paid. So they open, let's say they've paid and prompted to, good if I could spell prompted, split bill. So after this, they're going to tap on notification. As you can see, like, these are not well designed. But the reason I'm doing this, and I've sort of also kept it on an artboard, for example, is because you might end up just printing this off and having this up on a wall so people can like add to it or change notes. So they'll be taken to the transaction screen. So like it'll kind of pop up and show them what the transaction was and a few details around the transaction. I'll just put this in, they'll tap on a button here to split. Sorry to people who are OCD and want these to be centered. It's paining me too, but I'm just trying to do this as fast as possible. They'll choose friends that they want to split the bill with. To split bill with. So I'll just put user. I have user here. What I would recommend is that actually you name that person if you can. In a user flow, like, I think user's a bit vague. So I think if you can kind of name that person more specifically, that's even better, because I think users could be anyone, and when you're trying to design something, you're really trying to empathize with people, and so using their name or using kind of what their profession or what they're doing to get more specific on that makes you kind of think from their lens on this, because they might have a particular way of thinking about it that might be a bit different to, say, someone else who might be one of your users, and you might break that down into segments and sort of gets a bit more complicated. But user's pretty generic, probably fine for this, but I think if you're getting more specific, you can kind of use that name. So they'll get, user gets confirmation. Oh wait, sorry. They would actually, I think in this instance, they would choose their friends, and then they would select confirm button. I think someone just asked about duplicating. I'm not quite sure what it is in Windows, but I'm holding down Alt or Option, sorry. Actually, it must be Alt in Windows, so Option on Mac and Shift just to keep it all in line. Here, so the next step, they've confirmed that that's what bill they want to split and who they want to split it with, and so they'll get user sees confirmation screen. So I'm breaking these into pretty small steps. You might make these a bit bigger depending on what you want to do. I just want to edit this artboard to make it a little bit bigger. As you can see, there's a lot of little steps within this, and I'm just continuing that. You also might want to number them as well. I think that's quite helpful. What you might end up doing as you go after this is you might replace these cards with I guess the wireframes and the screens, which we end up getting to. So you can all of it is really just making things easy for yourself and for other people to come in and read what's happening and just very quickly understand sort of what you're designing and what you're doing. So they've seen the confirmation screen. I think it'd be really good at this point if they wanted to edit the amounts. I think this would be a good point to do something like this, and I also don't think it's something that often comes up. I think you can use, there's a couple of bill splitting apps I think Splitwise, and there's a few others. It'd be very easy just to say, okay, let's just split it evenly, which is fine, but inevitably you're probably going to have an instance where someone ordered the salad or someone brought a bit of wine and you don't want to split it evenly. So I think you want to be able to have an ability to edit those individual amounts that people see. So I think at this point you might see that everyone's splitting it evenly, but you can click on a few things to kind of confirm what the actual amount is that you want to do that. So user edits individual amounts. And then I will also think at this point you might want to put a note. So when you usually send people money, you kind of saying, okay, this is what this is for. Adds a note. And I think at this point you're probably confirming that they've done it. I think what I'm just making a bit of essentially where a flow like this comes from is your experience in testing with people. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you might also use something like a story map to map this out, or a few different ways. You might map out someone's day and their behaviours, but you're drawing upon your knowledge of what someone's, I guess, flow looks like based on what you've talked to them about. So I might have interviewed someone and they've told me that this is kind of what I would do normally and this is what I would like to do next. And so I'm drawing on that from my head and sort of trying to empathise and think, how would a user use something like this? So that's what's kind of telling me what might come next. Now, the thing about this is it's definitely step one, and it's probably not the most robust flow that you're going to have. You're going to probably find that there's all these other ones that kind of come into play and you haven't thought about. So I think in that instance, this is why we test it, and then we take it forward and we want to test whether this flow is accurate to what people would do, or if there's another step we've missed, another action that's really crucial to them completing that goal, because we might have forgotten something in there that is actually really important. All right, so user at this point, they've added a note, they've added their friends, they've edited all the different amounts, so they request to split. So that's kind of sending it off, and I've used the word request there because I think I've kind of stolen that a bit from Uber, because you request to split a ride, right? And I think in this case it's sort of a similar action. You're requesting to split a bill, because I think you're not going to just send it off and people automatically are going to have their money reduced. I think you need to confirm with people, so they'll need to confirm in their side of the app that that's happened. And that's actually another flow that I need to look at as part of this feature, is what's that look like for someone else when they're going through this process of accepting that as well. So they've requested to split, and then I think at this point they would see an updated transaction screen with split pending. Cool. So that's kind of my basic kind of flow here. And this will help me now design the wireframes. So I've got them paying, I've got notifications, I've got them tapping the notification. They'll look at that on the transaction screen and they'll press a button to say that they're confirming that, they'll choose friends, and they'll go through that process. So to quickly jump into wireframes now, I've started a little bit around setting this up. So what I want to do here is I want to essentially keep things really simple. Again, it's really low fidelity. And what I could do at this point is say use Wildcard's library of assets, which we actually talked about when I did the live stream last week around using libraries in XD. But I've kind of deliberately not done that because I find using colour and using polished assets often means that people get very hung up on certain things like colour and very minor details when they're actually, what you're trying to test is this really unbiased look at like, what does this flow feel like and are these correct and what's working and what's not. So I think in this instance, I'm just going to use black and white. I'm going to keep it really simple. On the assets in the files that we've put up, I've actually put all these things as components so you can grab some of these elements and use them. I've just done that also to make my life a little bit simpler when I'm just making this. But one thing I will grab from this notification screen here is I'm going to open up my library of iOS elements because I actually want to kind of replicate what that looks like. So and make it a bit realistic so it's not completely foreign. So I'm just going to try and grab, which I'm going to unlock this, and I'm going to grab, or at least try and grab, this notification, which I didn't grab. Go through these. I'm just going to remove this. We'll go back and edit all these later. I wonder why I can't grab this. All right, let's delve into the layers. Notifications, there we go. That's probably the simplest way to do it. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to go back to my notification screen and I'm going to drop it in. And I've got this component already made. It's from the iOS library. It'll replicate that feeling of, all right, I've got a notification, and that's going to start all of the flow. So what I can do here is just quickly edit this. So I think there's usually a little logo here, which I may not have copied across, but that's fine. You can kind of add it in. So that is notification from Wildcard. I'm going to say the notification title is say it's 56 paid at cafe. And I might say in this like little notification here, something like, I should be better at this. This should be like a copywriting kind of exercise. I haven't really thought about what it would be, but it would be something like to prompt people to split. So tap through to split this bill with friends. All right, I might edit that a little bit just so it looks a bit nicer. So it's a bit more clearer, but essentially that's fine for now. That's all we really need. They want to get the sense that this happened now. I've just got this notification and that's going to start this flow. So this is the transaction screen from the Wildcard app. So on the app, you can go into your transaction list like you do on any other banking app, tap on a little cell on the transaction itself, and you'll pop up with this screen here. Right now, actually, if you go to that, it doesn't actually have that button. So what I'm doing is suggesting that we're going to add this button in, this split with friends button. And I'm actually just going to grab over here, I've already made, at least I thought I already made, I didn't make a secondary button. What I did. Anyway, so I've got a secondary button here. I'm making it secondary because I'm not assuming that people are going to make this their primary action at this point. I'm going to assume that people might want to, and they may have come through here in a different way, but it's not necessarily what they want to do. They also might want to mark this as an expense, which is another feature you can do in Wildcard, because they're sort of all about separating your bills and your spending money so that you can keep a track of things. So I don't want to mess too much with the existing features, but what I've done is added a new button here that's quite simple and clear for people to follow. So at this point, I'm going to copy this across here. Now I'm imagining the flow of this is going to work in that people are just going to sort of be pushed to the right and follow it along as a series of steps. So that means a couple of things. One, I'm going to give them, they need to have the option to go back. So I'm just going to put in my little back button at the top here. I'm not being fussy about where that is at the moment, but I would, in the next round of production and polish, look at where that goes. And I think this is a little bit large. I would also, when I come to the next round of things, look at making all these type sizes consistent with the library. And I might say select maybe I'm going to do split $56 with, I'm going to just center this. I might just put this back up onto the top line here. And I'm just going to like make this a little bit bolder so it's pretty clear what the action is. So I think like at this point, there's a couple of things I want to have in here. I want to put a search field in. So as you can see, I just dragged that from my components. Now I'm kind of assuming at this point that people are just going to quickly search for something. And again, I'm kind of almost going back to what I'm familiar with in something like Uber, where the quickest thing for me to do is to type that person's name and they'll show me that name and that's all good. I think at the moment, I can't quite remember, but they definitely used to have this feature where you would have your recent people that you've kind of you've used. So I want to have that feature in here too. I want to have people that I frequently split bills with, because you kind of will have your cluster of friends that you often go out with and you often do this sort of stuff. At least that's what I kind of learnt from the research. So I'm going to have a little label at the top here that says recent, and I'm going to grab two things. One is my little add button here. And the reason is, and you could do this in the search field, and what we might find in the testing is that there's a better place for this. I'm putting it here because it sort of feels a bit more easier. But I'm going to say in this line, what we've got is the ability to quickly add someone in case they actually aren't part of Wildcard, or they aren't part of, you don't have their BSB and account details and that sort of stuff. And then I'm going to have these little avatars to represent people. So I'm going to put a little label under each of these. I'm going to set this to it seems a bit small. I didn't really do everything really large. That was not large. So I'm going to just label this add. I think it's really important to often add label actions rather than just have like a button. And that's generally also from an accessibility point of view. So my first friend is going to be Flynn. And then I'm going to do James, who we just spoke to. Oops. And let's do Liv, just because we need a girl in there. Cool. So we've got basically these people here. So you might very quickly be able to tap on their profiles and just add them into who you want to split it with. What I'm also thinking about at this point is like, how do I prototype this so that people get a bit of a feel for what this experience is going to be like? And I think sometimes you have to kind of anticipate a little bit how the program works. So in this case, I need to have a little screen here that's going to, I guess, replicate that feeling of I'm going to quickly select someone and it's going to show me that I've selected them. But just quickly for now, I want to put a primary button in here that just says next, because at this point, that is the primary action you want someone to take at this point, is to kind of go through and select someone else. I'm going to quickly duplicate this. And then I'm going to just put like a little line to separate these people here. And I'm going to put this avatar down the bottom here, and this area is going to represent the people that I've selected, so that whether I've typed their name in or whether I've tapped on their avatar, then I'm going to make sure that it's really clear that they are selected. So one thing is I'm going to put them into this kind of like, maybe even I might just even label this area as like selected. It's not a particularly nice word. I think I'd probably go back and look at some like tone of voice stuff to actually get that feeling a bit nicer. And then I'm going to put this little tick button on top, label on top of this to make me know that I've definitely selected that person and that person is going to be requested for money. So I'll just change this person to someone called Jess. And then you can be Elaine, which is my cat's name. Don't ask. It's a long story. Yes, it's Seinfeld related. And then I'm just going to copy this across and do that. What I might do, just because we're sort of getting towards the end of this, is I'm going to go to my already pre-prepared screens at the top here, which, as you can see, I've filled out these wireframes. And if you've downloaded the assets already, you'll be able to see that this is where those live. So as you can see, I've kind of put in the people I'm requesting to split this with. Actually, that's interesting. I've actually been very specific here with this word request, so that it's really clear that people know what this action is doing. I've got this confirmation screen here, which is sort of saying once I've confirmed who I'm splitting with, I get a bit of an overview and it says I'm splitting it with these 4 people. And I've told people, the user, that they can tap to edit individual amounts. So they can tap on these and they can get that through. Now, at this point I might be wondering, well, is that enough? Is that clear enough to say that they know what to tap on? But at this point, I don't know. That's an assumption I'm making. And a lot of what we do in product design is test those assumptions so that we're not feeling too biased. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now, but I'm curious to see if people know when I say tap what they mean and where. So they may edit those things, and then they also might add a note. And kind of like what I was saying before, when you're prototyping, you're trying to replicate that experience and you sort of do a few little hacks. So I've got this extra screen here around adding a note, and I've put the note in there so that you'll see when I prototype this, I'll prototype this field to kind of go straight to this screen and it'll be instant. So it'll look exactly like they've just filled it in. So I've requested to split this here. Then I've got this last button here around send request, and then you press send request and you get this little back to the transaction screen that we started with initially. And it now has this sort of pending split kind of information on here. So I'm really aware that that's what's going to happen and that is actually pending. And I think, I anticipate like when people confirm those split requests, you might get a little tick on these too to confirm that those people have done that. So that's what I've done for the wireframes. And as you can see, they're not particularly high fidelity. They're pretty basic and pretty easy to use. And it's not, I think, again, it's very much an overview. I think you could still keep building this flow out. As you can see with this flow, like there's a lot to it, but you can still keep going. You could have a second flow. You could have other elements that you want to make sure you incorporate, like what does the confirmation of a split request look like? So you can sort of see there's a lot to it, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're doing here. And we're really using XD to wireframe. And then the last thing I'm doing here is I'm going to prototype this and link it all up. In the assets one, I've already linked this all up, so I think this one is also linked. But essentially, what I can sort of show you, if I can undo this link, if I unlink this component, that's pretty easy. So, oops, I did that one, I think. Let me just, be good if all right. So essentially, I can just show you, I've linked this component to this screen here. And I've linked this button so that goes to the next one. I'll show you, I guess, oops, I've already done that one. So maybe I'll do this as an example. It's really good. I can link the whole screen or I can link particular elements, which is really useful. So in this instance, I've just selected this avatar and I'm going to grab from this arrow and I'm going to draw kind of with this. It's really easy, and just put it on this screen because that's where it goes. I'm going to say that it should transition. That's the transition that I've got. I've got all these options, and that's a whole other kind of thing to delve into. But essentially, I can choose how it animates to the next screen, and I can choose again also what that I guess looks like. And in this instance, I want it to push left because that's the kind of I guess transition which is quite familiar in iOS. So yeah, super easy. Again, I've done this with all the buttons. I've just linked these back so people can play with it a little bit. And I can just demo it here for you. Oops, if I just go back to the home screen. All right, so I've got my notification. I tap on that. I see my expense. I say split with friends, and I select Flynn, and also Liv just popped up as well, but I've kind of added that here. I do confirm. I can see that they're all there. I tap on add a note, and it pops up with lunch at cafe, and I send the request, and then I'm back to my original screen with that. So it's really simple and easy, but essentially what we would do from here is to go and test that again. So like I said, all about testing, continually learning and iterating on ideas. We're nothing set in stone at this point. We're really open to hearing what people think about it and how they interact with it. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll take again what we've learnt from this week of testing, and we will go through and, I guess, start to polish it and start to make it look a little bit prettier. So hopefully that was really straightforward. Like I said, download the assets. Feel free to share what you're working on and what you learn from testing if you're also doing those at home. In week 4, we're going to go through and talk a bit more about what you've been doing, and if you share those things, we can run through it. But yeah, that's it from me. Thanks so much, and come back next week for week 3. We're looking at production and polish on UI design. Thanks so much. See you then.